Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's live show. I hope that you are all doing well. Thank you for tuning in live from all around the world. We'll get straight into it. My guest tonight is the formidable king of the FOIA request. That's Freedom of Information Act request. If you're unfamiliar with the etymology. He's also the co-founder of Expanding Frontiers Research, and his name is Jack Brewer. He is a long-time researcher of ufology and related topics, and for many years he ran the popular blog The UFO Trail, where he covered topics such as the Leah abduction case and much, much more. He is also the author of two excellent must-read books. If your intro first is The Greys Have Been Framed, Exploitation in the UFO Community, and the second is Wayward Sons, NICAP and the Intelligence Community. At Expanding Frontiers Research, he is dedicated to demonstrating best research practices, and he prioritizes evidence-based research and enjoys helping others create reliable work. God knows we need that in this field. And also, he's helped me with many a FOIA request. Please welcome the one, the only, Jack Brewer. Hi, Jack. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, Emily. Thanks so much for having me tonight.
You're very welcome. Did you like that intro?
That was fantastic. Thank you. I feel like I should get a crown and wear it. Thank you.
You deserve one for all the messages that you've put up with from me and all of the emails and all of the pestering.
It's a pleasure to help. It really is. I sincerely enjoy it. That's something that we wanted to facilitate at Expanding Frontiers, was helping folks with their research, and especially folks like you that do good work.
Thank you. Well, you've helped a lot, especially for people watching. The next video that I put out, that should hopefully be out in May, includes some very interesting information. It was gleaned from Freedom of Information Act request that Jack filed on my behalf. So you will see a shout out in that video to Expanding Frontiers. So as we're going to kind of like, this is a very kind of casual chat. You've seen the show before. I do have a list of questions, but I've listened to a lot of interviews with you. I've seen you on Erica Lukes's show a lot of times, and I really want to know more about your life and what kind of led you into this area of research. So, like, take us back to young Jack. What was your first kind of foray into like fringe topics?
I was born in the 60s. And in order to kind of envision this, people my age and older would already know. But for younger generations, I think it's important for me to point out that we had 3 network television stations and a newspaper that most places was daily. I lived in larger cities and got daily newspapers. And that was where you drew information. And these networks had a news show that would be like a half hour a couple of times a day. So when something you were interested in was on, it was a really big deal to get a couple of columns worth of a newspaper article, or a 90-second spot on the news that told you something about it. And out of that, I became interested in paranormal topics, ghosts. I would order books about it at like the school book fairs when I was in school. In the 1970s, the types of television shows that we had on these network channels and some local affiliates would be Night Gallery, Twilight Zone reruns. I think there was a show in the 70s called ESP with Gary Collins, I think was his name. And each week, someone's extrasensory perception would make them a hero and save people from some catastrophic circumstances had it not been for their ESP. And so what I'm trying to explain here and help people envision is how you get conditioned in circumstances like that to start kind of taking it for granted that this stuff is real. And like, even though you know it's television and you know it's entertainment, when your senses are overloaded with these stories again and again and again, it gets more challenging to remember, to separate what you know to be true from what you're supposing. And then I read authors like John Keel and Jacques Vallée. And John Keel was a masterful storyteller, very talented, very entertaining. And he painted a picture of counterculture that supported UFO beliefs and psychic beliefs and things like that, belief in psychic phenomena. And this was kind of a liberal attitude about it too, that the on the political scale, I mean, and that if the scientific community, as Keel portrayed them, were stuffed shirts and ignoring the common man's experiences, well, then that made the guy that is looser and counterculture kind of in league with the hippies and becoming a more attractive liberal type of thing, to not be like your parents. And so that's kind of the social circumstances that I grew up in the South. I was born in Nashville and lived around the Southeast, New Orleans, Charlotte, lived in the DC area a while as an adult, and have made my home in Central Florida more than not over the last few decades, the Orlando area. And I raised some children. I had a wife, then an ex-wife, as is all too common, I guess. And while I was involved in that and a sales career and really money motivated to live, you know, had a lot of financial responsibilities, I kind of lost track of it. You know, like I kind of have this saying about that it's almost that interest in the paranormal is almost a luxury and a thing of privilege, that if a person has the means to be traveling to UFO conventions and spending money on airfare and lodging and all of that, it kind of qualifies them, you know, as a certain socioeconomic group in some circumstances. And I've kind of joked about, you don't get a whole lot of Bigfoot reports from war zones where supply lines have been fractured, you know, that like there's not time for it, you know. I ain't got time.
That's not.
Right. And when there's children to be raised, you ain't got time to be worrying about alien abduction too much, you know. But in the early 1990s, I started getting back into it and paying attention again, and got active with some organizations, attended a lot of MUFON events, went started going to UFO conferences, at least the local ones.
And this was in the 90s.
Go ahead.
This was in
Pardon?
the 90s that you were involved. You were going to UFO conferences.
That's correct. I was interested in Buddhist teachings, and I would attend residential retreats and silent retreats, meditation retreats. And eventually came with the UFO stuff to be disillusioned. And I like to think that the reason that is because I was sincerely interested. I really cared. And when I would hear a speaker at a conference and they would seem to me to not address the obvious questions, or I'd read a paperback that was promoted as a must read that tells all and leaves me with more questions than I started with, I would be frustrated, and I would follow up myself, and I would contact people, and I'd ask them if they'd talk to me, and ask them the questions that it seemed like they were evading or omitting. And that's what led me in the 2000s. In 2010, I began writing the UFO Trail because I felt like I had some things to contribute to the topic that weren't being addressed, that were being overlooked. I enjoyed writing. I enjoyed interviewing people, reaching out to people, asking them questions. I enjoyed writing about the oftentimes contradictions and the stories. And the deeper I looked into it, the more elusive the paranormal aspects of it became. And then I eventually put it in a book form, and the graves had been framed. That odd title comes out of kind of an inside joke that some associates and me had, that we'd try to like explain it to people that, you know, it's a mixture of charlatans and people wanting money and people that are sincerely misled, and government officials that are not being transparent, and you know, Emily, you end up in this complicated explanation of what you're trying to tell them. And so we had this inside joke of just say they've been framed, the graves have been framed. They didn't do all that
True,
stuff.
though. It's such a great title. It's genuinely such a great title, and it really kind of sums up like the like the contents of the book, but also like exactly what you're saying. Like, and we were saying this a little bit before we started the stream, that when it comes to these topics, especially UFOs, people want an answer, right? Because it's, you know, you want to know what it is, but people also want a simple answer. And with this topic, there are no simple answers. There's a million and one different theories. There are so many different personalities, and you can't just sum it up in one sentence. It's basically impossible.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's pretty much how I got to here. I have a lot of empathy for people that believe in things that are not established to be true. Like anyone, I can become intolerant. I can lose my patience with that when they don't seem to have an ability to accurately identify the difference between belief and what's established to be true. You know, you can argue your point all you want. You can show evidence of there's this video and there's this witness narrative and there's this chain of events that to some individuals indicates a non-human intelligence in a specific case. Yet it would also be correct that in every one of those instances that's been published that I'm aware of, it's not established to be fact. It's just inference and supposition. And it's unreasonable to demand that people not identify that as the reality of the situation.
Absolutely. So you're in the 90s and you're going to UFO conferences. What kind of conferences would you go to? Did you go to quite a lot of them? Were you part of like any sort of like local groups or organizations?
I have been involved with MUFON of at least a couple different times. I've joined it once or twice to pay my dues and support it if I was going to the meetings and listening to the speakers, interviewing the speakers, or at least getting in contact with people I would meet there to then write about them later, directly or indirectly. So I was involved with Florida MUFON, local MUFON chapters. I became disillusioned about that. That was in the early 90s, and then again in the 2000s. A couple of different areas. MUFON at that time had a lot of activity in Tampa, St. Pete, as well as here in the Orlando area. Over in Tampa, I saw speakers like John Mack and Bud Hopkins. They would visit and talk to people. And Bud Hopkins was one that I had read his work and I was particularly fascinated by. And he was one that first helped make me aware, not on purpose, but he inadvertently helped raise my awareness of how well a person can present a story in paperback form when they have an agenda, and how convincing and interesting it can sound. But then if you talk to the people in the book and you follow up on the things they're reporting in the book and you find them to be different, Hopkins was one of the first people that made me start questioning that. And again, to reemphasize, I'm from a generation that had a couple of network news, and you'd see the National Enquirer in the grocery store checkout line. Then fast forward years later, you've seen a few documentaries on television that sensationalize UFO abduction, but do it in like a news format, like it looks sciencey, like the way they do in the 80s and the 90s, that they did these well-produced documentaries. So then here people are flocking to MUFON symposiums that purport to be a scientific organization. And here's a man from Harvard, John Mack, that's saying this is absolutely real. Well, then, yeah, I'd like to know more about that. I'm with you, John Keel. I'm against the scientists. I want to know the truth that's being hidden from me. And there's no there. If you really drill down through it, there's nothing there more than he said, she said. There's a few marks when people wake up in the morning. There's some soil samples that are ambiguous. There's some blurry photos. And as information has increased, it voided the things that people like Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs were banking on being unfalsifiable, that now can be checked. Like, if someone's a hybrid, there's a lot of inexpensive ways to look for abnormalities now.
Oh, but they won't do that though, because that'll blow everything,
Right.
destroy
Technology.
the grift.
So technology surpassed their narrative that they were counting on to be unfalsifiable.
Yeah, exactly. What was kind of the atmosphere like in these kind of 90s conferences? Because I don't know what part, or like what kind of, how do I phrase it? Like whether it was early, mid, or late 90s. But there was a lot of kind of and there still is, especially in the early 90s, like a lot of like militia movements were kind of had involvements in the UFO world. And I wonder if you ever experienced any of that.
Not a lot that I was aware of in St. Petersburg or Orlando, no. The flavor of it was that extraterrestrials were here. They were kidnapping human beings on a regular basis. They had some kind of hidden agenda. But there were other camps that said it's beautiful, it's just helping our growth, it's just spiritual growth. But both of those believed that we were in a conflict with intelligence agencies that were trying to keep us from knowing this was true, and that were attending the conferences and were paying people, if not paying, at least had assets that would do the things they wanted them to do. Like this was right in the wake of Bill Moore.
Right.
And Gulf Breeze 6 was a thing. And Gulf Breeze was a thing. Nobody knew what to think about that. That was another thing that made me start questioning. Like this guy just, he just goes outside and takes pictures of it. And I was like, I wasn't too sure about that. Yeah.
For people that don't know what you're talking about the kind of like the Gulf Breeze area and the things that were going on there.
It's a fascinating area. I'm thinking of Tanner right now, Tanner Boyle, because I'm sure he's like discovered by now, wow, a lot was going on in this little neck of the woods. First of all, it's near a major Navy base, and it's Gulf Breeze, Florida, beach town. And a man named Ed Walters jumped out here with some photos and stories, and it blew up. Sometimes they go viral, sometimes nobody paid attention. However, it gets worked through the system. Ed became a thing. The town blew up. To this day, I think they still have tours, and it's a tourist destination. And one group of people that decided to head over were National Security Agency analysts from Germany. They went AWOL and headed to Gulf Breeze and became known as the Gulf Breeze 6. And in their wake left stories about that they were going to kill Ed Walters because he was the Antichrist and the UFOs were demonic. And other stories said the Gulf Breeze 6, the NSA guys were heading to Gulf Breeze because it was rapture time and the aliens and Jesus were going to land on the shores. And a lot of fishy stuff with intelligence agencies went down in all of that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and Tanner, who has been a guest on here before, has got a great Substack called Getting Spooked, where he's gone over so much of this, the all to do with the Gulf Breeze 6, and he's like covered that topic very, very intensely. So you're in, you kind of take this extended break, right? Because obviously, the way that you make it sound is you kind of got into this as a believer, like as a lot of us do, and then you kind of become disenfranchised with it, and then you take a break. Was that kind of? Do you think that taking a prolonged break from it helped you kind of come back with a better outlook on the entire topic?
I do. I took at least what we'd call 2 prolonged breaks. One was between adolescence and my late 20s when I started attending conferences in the 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one was between about 1994 or so and into the 2000s. And that one particularly helped me to come back at it with a little more skepticism because of at least 2 things that happened. One of those was that I was operating a music studio, self-employed. And one of the things that I did, the way I started learning about the nonprofit industry, was I read about and learned what the advantages are of having a nonprofit organization and things that can be done with it. And I helped found one with the music studio I was working in. And in that process, I was submitting grant proposals to different organizations for different agencies and private foundations. And one of the things that I would do on a regular basis was make my case in a grant proposal for here's the problem, here's the data that establish it and supports it, here's the proposed solution, here's how much money it's going to take, and here's how we're going to measure if it's working, and when I'll report on it, in what ways, what the milestones will be, what the methods are, how we're going to measure success. And it was abundantly clear to me that that was missing from UFO, quote, research, unquote. It was more than apparent that to many UFO enthusiasts that the game is to perpetuate mystery, not to resolve or identify solutions to the problems. The other thing that happened was a group reached out to me by this point in time, like 2010. One of the things that were popular were discussion boards and message boards and UFO forums. Above Top Secret, MUFON had a forum.
Classic,
Yeah. Open Minds Forum. There were all these places to go. And now people are interacting with people they've never seen before. We're using screen names. The Pandora's box of the internet was wide open by then.
Yeah.
And this group reached out to me that invited me to join their private discussion list, e-list. And I appreciated how they described themselves and what their approach was. However, it became apparent pretty early on that these were people that were in a different education class than I am. They had degrees in science and chemistry. One was a psychiatrist. I do not have any such degree. And so I told them, if you want to withdraw the invitation, no hard feelings. And they were like, nah, stick around. Who cares? Let's, we're just chatting anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And even though at that point I was still kind of arguing things from somewhat of but what about this case? Or one of the things that happens too, as we get more skeptical about the paranormal, we might pick up the CIA conspiracy baton and run with it a while. And wow, well, that makes perfect sense. It was, government misinformation this whole time. And what we kind of need to learn to put in check is being too extreme with any of those beliefs, and just take it easy, be moderate, let the facts speak for themselves. And I feel like in that group, I learned that because I felt a responsibility to understand, even if I was going to disagree with them, to understand how they were identifying information as reliable or not, and how they were identifying something as being established to be factual, pending more information that shows it to be otherwise. And I cared, I wanted to know, like, okay, so if this, you can reject this or dismiss this story out of hand, show me why. And so the combination of my experience with the nonprofit industry and grant writing and reporting on grant projects and interacting with this group of degreed and credentialed professionals about UFOs gave me a perspective I had not had up to that point about even other people with some credentials, like a David Jacobs that was a doctor of history or things like that. It gave me a different perspective. And that's another thing that I lose tolerance with people today. And in my research, that I feel I do have a right to speak to because I did it. If we're going to make arguments about something, we have responsibilities to understand the people that are rejecting them. And if it's rejected by the intelligence community, if it's rejected by academia, if it's rejected by qualified experts, we have a responsibility to understand why that is and what information we need to obtain and how we need to package and present it for it to be up to their standards, especially if we're arguing that we should be accepted by those people.
On that point, because just to kind of pivot off that, because I think it's interesting, on the FOIA request stuff, right? And maybe this is a little bit inside baseball, but hopefully people find it interesting, because I find it interesting. It's all part of the research process. What about when, like, let's say, we'll take a hypothetical but real case of, you know what I'm talking about, but I'm not going to name it on the stream for different reasons. But let's say you're investigating a case and you've got suspicions that somebody involved in the case, it has connections to the government, right? But you don't have suspicions that they are connected to the government. You know that they are. You know that they worked in a specific department, and you know that historically there's been a lot of kind of, nefarious involvement of certain government agencies in, say, the UFO community, for example. And you start to build a theory out of, this could be, these two things could be correlated. But when you put in, Freedom of Information Act requests, you don't get anywhere. You get roadblocked because for whatever reason, they're not going to, the powers that be, whoever they are, whoever it is that you're sending a FOIA request to, refuse to release that information. At what point do you, because I absolutely believe in like pursuit of the truth, no matter where the truth leads you, right? But also, I guess the overarching question is, what happens when you hit a wall and you can only go so far, but that there might be something there?
That's a really good question, Emily. For me, I think it's important to separate my speculation from what I can show to be factual. And it's okay to show that this FOIA request yielded no results. They told me that there's no responsive records, or either that the records are denied that they exist and they're being withheld. And then I can still explain, I speculate that this might have happened. I wonder if this might have happened. All of the Gulf Brief 6 stuff we were discussing, for instance, there's really no conclusive information. We don't really know why all of that happened the way it did. And we can definitely place some of the players in intelligence agencies. We don't know why. Then I can speculate and say, I think that it may have been because of this, this, and this. But yeah, I think we have responsibilities to say, but I can't prove that to be the case. I think we can watch for that when we're watching people's videos and reading their work as well. Is at what point do they kind of start going off the rails and describing this chain of events in a way that they're really not showing necessarily happen that way. And it gets complicated, as you're aptly pointing out, with following a trail of records, because even in letters that we obtain from archives and things like that, they may have been lying to the person they wrote the letter to.
Exactly.
They may have been saying they're going somewhere for Christmas because they didn't want to hang out with the person they're writing the letter to. People do,
Do you think that it's okay to speculate about some cases, but as long as you kind of say, you put a disclaimer, you say, this is speculation. I've got a good instinct based on the research work that I've done, and this is what I can tell you definitively. But this part, which I have a feeling or a theory on, I'm going to tell you, but I'm also going to be clear that this is not confirmed and it's speculation. Do you think that that's okay?
Absolutely. Isn't that what analysis is? I mean, that, like you say, I've looked into X number of true crime stories at this point. I've been working on this one for 9 months. My analysis, subject to further information, is that here's what may have happened. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And the problem comes, I guess, is when people get too kind of like like firmly planted and they're like, I will not budge. This is what I believe in, and nothing that you say can change that for me whatsoever. And there's a lot of that in the UFO community.
Absolutely. And then you get to where they might, like, for instance, if they have an archive, they might prefer some of the records remain not published, or if a person's in charge of someone's estate, they might prefer the public continue to have a certain opinion of them, that certain information they have would change, especially if it would shoot holes in something they've been writing about for 7 books and 15 years. Yeah.
That's the thing that always baffles me, I think, because like, for me, if I find out something totally new about a case that I'm researching, that's a great thing. Even if it proves that the theory that you had previously wasn't the correct theory. For instance, in the case that I'm going to be releasing a video on, that you got a FOIA request for me for, as I was doing the research, going through the newspaper archives, I'd come up with my own idea of like, solving the mystery, so to speak. And then when you get to the FOIA request, it's like, oh, this is something totally different. So it's like you have to be like willing to you can have your hypothesis and your theory, but I guess the point is like you have to be able to be flexible with it. And the problem is that the majority of people just don't seem, I say the majority, but I guess we're talking about a very like a subsection of ufology and fringe topics in general that just don't seem like they want to budge at all.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I think it's the loudest portion. I'm not sure that they represent a genre as much as they're the loudest part of the genre, depending on how you're watching it. If you're on Twitter or you're on Facebook, or I guess conferences are going to kind of start up again. But yeah, that is interesting. Being prepared to revise our position based on further information also makes us better writers and reporters at what we're doing, because you've got to leave room for that later, instead of drawing a conclusion that's not necessarily there. And it can get really hard to be self-aware of that. Oftentimes a symptom of confirmation bias is that we don't know it. We don't know we're doing it. If we're sincere and we're honest about our work, then we don't know it. If we're basically, doing the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, which is after you've emptied the gun on the barn wall, go paint the bullseye around the most bullet holes.
That seems to be a lot of what people on UFO Twitter are very keen on doing.
Yeah. So it keeps us honest to be willing to say, well, look what he got, look what they got. That was a good find, and that needs to be incorporated into the record. Yeah.
Do you get a lot of like heat or pushback or criticism for your stance? Like, are you kind of like, because I see the kind of vehement hatred that's thrown at people like Stephen Greenstreet or Sean Kirkpatrick and, Mick West. And first of all, wonder whether you get that kind of heat as well because of the stance you take, and if you do, what are your opinions? See, Tana says, why is UFO Twist so mean to you? Can't they see you're a lovely guy?
Who could not like this? I do get pushback. Probably the most I got, or the most passionate, for lack of a better word, would have been during my descent into alleged alien abduction with Leah Haley and Emma Woods and Carol Rainey. That stuff was melting worlds for people. That heroes were going down, stories were going down. I've heard a person that I knew pretty well in real life at these MUFON meetings say on a show one time, and I appreciated that they were able to articulate this, that it disturbed them when they would see circumstances where a person was proven to be disingenuous because it made them doubt their own story more, that their own experiences became less real. And I appreciated that they had the courage and the self-awareness to say that, And so I think that was when I probably got the most, and the people and the women that I was working with and interacting with got the most. Some of it was just inexcusable and quite disturbing in how it was accepted by the community at large on email lists like UFO Updates list, the Twitter, that was the Twitter of its day, and things like that, the misogyny and not allowing women to participate in discussions about them was what happened. And in more recent times, people are pretty passionate about the skinwalker foolishness. They're pretty passionate about To the Stars. They're also pretty cowardly. They're usually behind screen names and things like that. But yeah, it goes around. It's something that you just weigh out. How much you're willing to be involved, how much you weigh it on an ongoing basis. Back with some of those women that I mentioned, they would I'm weighing how to word this, because they would make me aware of things that were happening that they felt a responsibility to make me aware of. And in the context of documenting their stories and writing about their stories, it was significant. Yet they felt like it shouldn't be published, because if attention seeking is a big motive, then we didn't want to, quench that thirst, so to speak. So I'll just leave it at that. But this isn't new to the UFO subculture. I'm disappointed that for a lot of people, they're involved to that extent before they knew that it might happen. The topic can appear to be fun and interesting. In the vast majority of circumstances, somebody saw something in the sky once upon a time, started hanging around some meetings, thought it might be fun, went to a conference, joined an online group, knew some people on Twitter, started exchanging direct messages, and then have it all go sideways with being in a faction that this faction hates, and these people have sent people after you, and your boss is getting emails about your UFO beliefs, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not new to the genre, but it is really disappointing that they're often neck deep in it before they were aware that and before they were aware that it could become that problematic. And another thing that I've said in the past, Emily, that I'd like to emphasize, please, is that honest people are typically pretty trusting. And so it's not that they're unintelligent. It's not that they're gullible. It's that they're honest. And if somebody got on a stage with a podium and a microphone and told them about the time that their car got stopped on a road and they went on some kind of vessel with aliens for a couple hours, an honest person will kind of shrug and go, wow, and then they'll talk to people online about it, and they'll meet up for coffee and so on and so forth. And an honest person won't be thinking about that. And if people start not liking my opinion, they might start talking about it on my spouse's Facebook page or something like that.
Yeah, you see a lot of that nowadays, especially on like UFO Twitter, these kind of warring factions. And it will just becomes incredibly, to the point where people don't even talk about the actual topic anymore. It becomes about interpersonal drama. Tanner asks, can you tell us more about Leah Haley?
Yeah, Leah is a fascinating, intelligent woman. She was a professional accountant. I suppose it would have been the 1980s or so, like I described, like people did, she read some books, she saw some stuff on television, she started thinking about things that had happened to her, she started making some correlations, and she got involved with some UFO groups. That led to her being introduced to a man named John Carpenter that was the MUFON director of something or other, abduction research or some title they gave him. He was a licensed social worker in Missouri, and he was an advocate of hypnosis as a memory retrieval tool. And as I have described in the past, essentially, he and the Mutual UFO Network took Leah Haley and created an alien abductee. Several hypnosis sessions. The conspiracies got pretty insane. One of the sessions was that she was under the impression from the mental imagery conjured during this hypnosis session that she had been aboard a UFO with alien creatures when it was shot down or grounded somehow by the military. And it seemed to be in water, and soldiers seemed to help her out of the craft and things like this. And the Mutual UFO Network had some guys. Donald Ware was a director in the Florida Panhandle. Here's Gulf Breeze again, area. And he and another MUFON person, based on the description that Leah gave of this crash, decided where it probably happened was on the naval base in Pensacola. And the three of them with Leah went looking for it, went looking for the place that this UFO was shot down with her on board, that grew out of a hypnosis session with John Carpenter. So a lot of stuff happened in all of this. And one of the things that outraged me most about it as I got into it was then Tom Dooley, another MUFON director, when asked by the Tampa Tribune about Leah Haley's story, told the Tampa Trib that it was unfortunate that people come up with such wild stories, and that hurts the work MUFON is trying to do, their scientific work they're trying to do. And of course, Mr. Dooley failed to mention that it was his fellow board members that created this story with Leah. But when I really got interested in it was then John Carpenter. I'm trying to think how to chronologically explain this, but the gist of the story is Carpenter got outed providing Robert Bigelow and NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Sciences, which was a Bigelow-controlled nonprofit organization at that time, and around 1995 to 2000. Bigelow got out, or Carpenter got outed providing Bigelow with the case files and hypnosis recordings of 140 abductees he had worked with without their knowledge and consent. And that was referred to as the Carpenter Affair. And he sold them for like $100 per case. He got $14,000 for this transaction, approximately over time. And one of the things that's just crazy about this, one of our themes here tonight, Emily, is, verifying information and the fact-finding process. I still hear people talk about the Carpenter Affair as being alleged, and he doesn't deny he did it. He told me in emails. He said, yeah, he doesn't deny he did it. He defends it. And that's just what researchers do. And he thought he should share this information with Bigelow. And the Missouri Professional Licensing Board thought differently about the circumstances. A researcher named Gary Hart presented them with quite a bit of information about John Carpenter's activities. And that brought a 5-year probation period on Carpenter as a condition of retaining his license. And among those things was that he seek and submit to therapy for I think it said, I think it was I'm wanting to say unfit professional, but I'm not sure. It was something along the lines of he had to take counseling and then report that counseling to his employer, who would report it to the licensing board about his basically it was an unhelpful professional. He was off the rails, that he was way out of line with different things he was doing. He married 2 of his hypnosis patients.
That's always a good sign.
Yeah.
Always great when that happens. It's never led to
there was a lot going on there. And just to put then yes, there's more. Then Leah decided that she had been led astray, and this really didn't make sense, and decided she gathered enough information to satisfy her decision-making process that she had been a victim of some type of intentional organized deception operation, human instigated, some type of MK Ultra type experimentation or manipulation. And I got interested in it and reached out to her, and I asked her where she would like me to purchase her books, if I could get them directly from her, if that would be most advantageous to her. And I did that. And then after I read them, I came back and I asked if I could talk to her, and we started doing that. And eventually I met with her. I drove up to the Panhandle where she was at that point in time, and we developed some trust, and she was open to me. I felt like that, to the best of her ability, she would show me documentation of things that she had the documentation for. And so I was pretty fascinated with that story, and that whatever did happen to her, I could identify multiple circumstances of times that she was manipulated, and for whatever reasons the person may have had. And I'll leave it at that for now. Yeah. And I'll go ahead and I'll add this, Emily. And some of them were spooks. So I don't know if the powers that be got interested in, wow, there's a lot of shit going on in Gulf Breeze. Somebody get down there and find out why. I don't know. Maybe the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing, and the FBI was investigating the CIA and didn't know it. CIA was investigating the NSA and didn't know it. I'm not sure, but there was a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, and it also happens in like this time period where this like UFO narrative that has come out of, and we've covered this a lot on this channel, on every stream. Just to address this comment, CIA agents, intelligence agents, people that work for the intelligence community. We've covered
Thank you.
we've covered like Rick Doty and Paul Benowitz on these streams. Well, at least I've covered them before. So I'm not going to do like a refresher on that. You can go back and look at some of the other streams that I've done. But it's interesting because all of this stuff that you're saying about Gulf Breeze happens in the wake of that, right? So this big kind of disinformation campaign to kind of seed these ideas into the UFO world. So things like Dulce Base, for example, things like Majestic 12, this idea of Ebens, this idea of like human alien hybrids and stuff is all kind of coming out of this. It's all kind of happening at the same time, right?
Yeah, it was. And the oversimplification, as you and I talked a little about before the show went live tonight, the oversimplification is there's aliens and the intelligence community is hiding it. And it's so much more nuanced and complicated than that. I even am disappointed oftentimes with what we might call the skeptics in the genre, because I don't think that they look enough at the money trail. They don't look enough at the intelligence community. They don't look enough at the charlatans. Like, they seem to often be almost gullible with people are just mistaken and don't know any better.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and it does a disservice to the topic in general, in my opinion, in that if we use tunnel vision and we only look at, is there an alien in this story or not, and then move on, it misses so many other aspects of social circumstances. And that's what I got really fascinated with, is when you boil it down, like Skinwalker Ranch, for instance, and you see just the ridiculous claims that are being made that are insults to intelligence. And even some of the skeptic leaning people will get these people on their podcasts, or they'll do shows with them and they'll talk about it. And even if they push back against it, it's still done from an angle of, is there a paranormal presence here or not?
Yeah.
And when you boil it down, they're basically saying that their excuse for being wrong about everything is they're just idiots. And I'm not as quick to buy that as a lot of people seem to be. If your excuse for why you can't create a series of experiments with a hypothesis and assess what happened in those experiments, reevaluate the hypothesis, and try it again, duplicate the experiments, get other people to conduct them and have the same results. If your excuse for that is you're just an idiot, well, then why are we even talking to these people? Well, like, why would we even be evaluating what they're doing other than to follow the money trail or something like that?
Yeah, there's a very like dismissive attitude, I think, that a lot of the skeptical community has. When I say like the skeptical community, I class myself as a skeptic, and I think I've said this on every stream. I'm probably like saying it for like the 15th time, But I think the skepticism is like a very important trait to have, or I don't know if it's a trait or a skill to have. Being able to read between the lines, being able to pick apart stories, being able to really get to the truth of something, like skepticism is a really good thing. And sometimes it goes way too far. Sometimes you become like a like like Dana said, skeptic with a capital S, right? You go down that kind of like a route of, you think just every, like you said, everybody's like stupid, or everybody's lying, or everybody just wants to get money, and it's like there are so many other explanations. It doesn't have to be like, I don't know, they want almost in the same way, like a hardcore kind of like, we need disclosure now, wants a simplistic answer. Kind of these capital S skeptics almost want a very simplistic answer as well. And your answer for a lot of this stuff is always that you're never going to get one straight answer. It's going to be a bunch of different things, and it's all going to be kind of unintelligible. But if you actually take the time, you probably can pick it apart to understand it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I was just choking. I guess the next place I want to go to, and it's tangentially related as all of this kind of stuff is. What are your thoughts on like extremism in the UFO community, and like, do you see a lot of it happening now? Because, and also to piggyback on that, another question about kind of like the overlap between religion and UFOs, because that's a big thing that's happening at the moment, and I think a lot of people are seeing it, but I don't know whether it's necessarily reached like the mainstream. I kind of brought it up a little bit last week when I was talking to Fundy Fridays, because they cover Christian fundamentalism and kind of conservative politics on their channel. But there is like this real kind of overlap between far right politicians and people with kind of like a far right ideology and involvement in the UFO topic.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating, really, that people can embrace completely alien, in its truest sense of the term, alien creatures from another world, and want a border wall built between here and Mexico.
Right. It's insane. It doesn't
So,
make any sense.
yeah, I kind of start with square one, means there's going to be a lot of contradictions in this ideology. I do see it. I see it a lot. It's been in this as long as I've been watching it. It certainly goes back to the mid 20th century, and the people that are considered, the fathers of the UFO movement were often racist.
Yeah.
There should be asterisks about if all of this is their research, well, maybe they had some skewed views about some things. Are they just products of their time? I don't know. We'll just move on to another decade and let's see what's happening in the 70s and 80s. Yep. Ufologists are using stories about aliens to bait people that, as we discussed earlier, are a socioeconomic class that apparently can afford to go to conferences, can afford to financially support UFO groups, bait them into listening to their radio shows, to coming to their speakers events, to subscribing to their newsletters. And when they're not talking about aliens, they're bellowing about racist stories and points of view and why you should be taking up arms and protecting yourself from all of the people that don't have the skin color you have that will certainly come kill you if you don't kill them first. And we see it today. We see the racism with dog whistles. We see different extremist views by any stretch of the term. I mean, we just had the anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing, and as you and Tanner, and I'm sure many of your audience are well aware, there's a lot of overlap with the people in that story and UFOs. Yeah. We just recently had a guy, drive an RV into Nashville full of explosives and blow it up that was influenced by the conspiracy and UFO communities. It's ongoing. It's disturbing. There's layers of the people that are involved in it. There's the high profile ones, like I was just alluding to Bill Cooper, that would use the UFO topic to beef up his following. Then you have people further down the line that may be less intentionally deceptive and get confused listening to late night talk radio, and they want to like these people, they want to believe them, and so they're influenceable. They start picking up their ideologies about guns, their political leanings. They'll adopt the political stances, and that's where we end up having people that will be arguing UFOs are here to give us free energy, and that we should leave people trying to get to North America and the United States from Central America. We should shoot them at the river. It doesn't make sense.
They don't compute it like logically, but somehow, well, and it's like you said, it's been there since the very beginning. It's, like you look at all of it, and again, it kind of goes, this is kind of why my kind of research interests overlap, right? New Age and ufology. And at some point the New Age kind of keeps going, and then ufology kind of comes in, and it picks up a lot of this stuff that was very present in kind of, I guess, what you'd call it like proto New Age movements, right? Because like technically New Age was a bit more of like a, came with I forgot what her name is, Alice Bailey, and then in kind of in 1950s, 1960s, then started to kind of pick up. But this kind of proto-New Age movement of people like Elena Blavatsky, founder of Theosophy, Guy and Edna Ballard, another one of my obsessive research interests. They were very much like, you can see a lot of the early contactee movement stuff in their writing and in the things that they were saying. And they were, as well as being, they were very kind of like New Agey. They invoked Saint Germain and a lot of Elena Blavatsky's masters, but to Guy and Edna Ballard, they were ascended masters. They kind of changed it up a little bit. But they were also Christian nationalists. And there's a lot of like, I think there's even talk, there's a lot of like stuff about Venus involved in like Guy and Edna Ballard, but they were like they recruited a lot of their members out of William Dudley Pelley's silver shirts. And William Dudley Pelley had his own UFO cult going called Soulcraft. So it's like, it is never, since it's very inception, before ufology was even a thing, the fascism has been there. And I guess this is like, at some point, I don't really have a question here, I'm just like rambling. but this is where you get this kind of thing that people like to say, like the new age to alt-right pipeline, the new age to the far right pipeline, and I'm like, there's no pipeline. It's been there. Like, it's there. Like, you get into it, you will find it right there. You're not being fed down a pipe. Like the
Yeah,
route.
it's the same sink, people. It's
Yeah.
not in a pipeline. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not to say that some people can't have, like, you know, spiritual views, be into crystals, be into tarot or anything like that. I don't want to ever come across as like I'm trying to be like a kind of hardcore atheist and be like, you can't believe in certain things, but like the root of a lot of these new age teachings is steeped in racism. And some people will argue and they'll say, oh, you know, it was a product of its time. And I'm like, okay, but explain William Dudley Pelley to me. The man was literally a Nazi, you know, like how many hundreds of thousands of people did we send to get rid of, to their deaths, to get rid of Nazis, you know? At some point, you have to call these people for who they are and what they believe in.
Yes, you do, and it does overlap. And I'm going to I know I'm going to take us around John's barn a little bit here too, but it all does relate. An investigative journalist named Dave Troy, that some of the listeners may be aware of, he has contributed comment for some of our work that Erica Lukes and I do at Expanding Frontiers Research. And he's generously invited me on his podcast before to discuss things. And one of the reasons is because he's not interested in UFOs. He's interested in the economy. He's interested in geopolitical politics. And UFOs keep butting in on his lines of research. And so he's interested in the social circumstances of it. And yeah, he's well aware, very familiar with how the silver shirts and the groups and the people you were just talking about affected the economy and the beliefs of their followers and things like that. And one of the things that Erica and I tapped Dave for was when we were working on a story about cryptocurrency, and that there is an element of the UFO community that simultaneously promotes bad investment advice and dubious UFO stories. And we, while Erica and I were working on this line of research, we interviewed a journalist that had done a story on a QAnon group getting targeted by a cryptocurrency scam. And that one even resulted in a suicide that was attributed to losing all of their money. So it very much seems like that we can see these parallels, and we can see that UFO conferences, high profile UFO people, are promoting digital investments in cryptocurrency, and it just goes hand in hand. I mean, let's face it, the UFO genre is a subculture of people that, like I said, if they're honest and they're sincere, and they will tend to believe things that they're told, and that can be attractive to people with political agendas and people that don't have a lot of scruples about separating other people from their money.
Absolutely. And it's like one of my areas of research is like these 1920s 1930s cults that were kind of popping up in the wake of like the New Thought movement while you've got the Great Depression happening, and just the sheer amount of these stories that I keep finding. I mean, just found one, but like in the last, well, I found it maybe about a couple of weeks ago, but I've started like actually writing about it now. But it's another one of these groups that was trying to scam. It was in like 1935. I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but they're basically trying to scam this woman out of $5,000 worth of paintings, which back in 1935, $5,000. Yeah, $5,000 today is a lot of money.
Yeah, that's a lot of
$5,000
money.
in
Yeah.
1935, it was a hell of a lot of money, and it's a story that I can only find in like 6 newspaper articles. But there are so many of these groups that kind of popped up with, like I said, with this kind of like New Thought movement, and I see it a lot now, especially because we're kind of like post COVID, and like I don't need to explain to people, we're currently alive. We know what the world is like at the moment. And there seems to again be like this boom in popularity of like very like positive thinking. You can think your way out of anything, and also these kind of like online cults, right, that have become very popular in QAnon's a great example, although I think there's elements of QAnon that are need to be further explored, i.e. their connection to intelligence agencies, and who benefits from QAnon and all that kind of stuff. But there's loads of like online cults, online scam artists. I mean, I could talk about it forever, and they've all got an origin story, and they all manage to bring people in, and they prey on people who just want their lives to be a little bit better. They want their lives to be more livable. They want they want to be able to have money in the bank, be able to feed their families, and unfortunately they get taken a ride by people who scam them out of everything. And it's like it's tale as old as time. And Tanner points out in the chat similarities between QAnon to Serpo, which is something that we talk about quite a lot. And especially like like the UFO belief that overlaps with QAnon stuff as well. It's just a whole twisted web.
Yeah, there's really not a lot new under the sun, and a big problem with it is that people don't know what's happened before. And so they then don't see the similarities in what's taking place now, and how it's just got a few variations. I've thought before that if people aren't going to read history books, they should at least be art fans, so that maybe they could learn from some of the great playwrights and whatnot about how these timeless stories just happen over and over again in one variation or another. And I mean, the UFO subculture requires turning over the audience and keep getting a new audience, so that it doesn't know there was somebody last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago,
Exactly.
4 years ago that said the same thing. Yeah.
And that person more often than not worked for some form of intelligence agency.
Or had close ties to it,
Yeah.
oftentimes. And the point you were getting at, it really should be buyer beware when it's a demographic of people that want more meaning in their life. And might have some money that is disposable, or they could be spent on getting that meaning in their life. It can be really attractive to charlatans, people with
Exactly.
political agendas. Yeah, it's disturbing.
So pivoting off that, because I want to get into work with expanding frontiers research. So first of all, can you tell us what expanding frontiers research is and what the goals are? And then we'll kind of go into because you talk a lot. Whenever I see you in interviews and stuff, I always kind of hear about Skinwalker Ranch, but I really want to talk about your work on FOIA requesting around Ramtha and her name's Jay-Z Knight.
That's correct.
Not the actual Jay-Z. She's not the Jay-Z. Those are just her initials, Jay-Z. Jay-Z Knight.
Right. Expanding Frontiers Research is a Utah corporation. It's tax exempt under Section 501c3 of the U.S. Internal Revenue Code, which means it's a nonprofit organization and donations are tax exempt. We're dedicated to conducting and publishing reliable research on a wide variety of topics, and we are dedicated to helping people learn to do their own FOIA requests and their own research, and being a resource to help folks how we can. The Ramtha request was originally Erica Lutz's idea. Like you, she has an interest in cults. And she also knew that the woman that uses the name Jay-Z Knight had been a VIP in the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON. And so among lots of other things we do requests on, we submitted a FOIA to the FBI on Ramtha's School of Enlightenment. And we did it that way because I, fortunately, at this point, knew enough about the Freedom of Information Act that I knew if I submit a request on a person that is alive, they will tell me that they will glomar it, which means neither confirm nor deny, and tell me that if the records exist, they would be exempt from disclosure because they would be an unwarranted invasion of privacy or something to that effect, which is basically saying they won't give you someone's file until they're deceased. The FBI won't. Ramtha Jay-Z Knight was born in Roswell and claimed in the 1980s that she had an interaction in her kitchen with the spirit or whatever materialized of an entity that she called Ramtha and said was a warrior 30,000 years ago against Atlantis or something to this effect. And she got popular, like we were saying earlier, slow news day or whatever. She figured out how to get people interested. And she wrote books about it, and they sold, and she got on talk shows, which was the thing in the 80s. Like I say, we didn't have a whole lot of media like we do today. And if it was on TV, you pretty much watched it. And if Oprah and the different guys were doing the talk show circuit, the talk show people, you'd see about it. And she was popular and seemingly amassed a fortune and eventually, in more recent times, gave some of it to the Mutual UFO Network for preferential treatment and access to things. She is one of, piggybacking on our previous topic, she's one of the largest Trump donors in her county in Washington, is where she's located, has an 80-acre compound in Washington. And so we did a request to the FBI. They only gave us a couple of pages on Ramp the School of Enlightenment. And those pages were a memo because someone had given them a heads up that you might want to take a look at this group. They may be subversive. They're doing weird stuff. And on her compound, she runs what she calls a school, and which means people that will give them money can come there. And she channels this Ramtha. And this is supposedly teachings from this 30,000-year-old entity. And some of it turned into racist rants. Again, ties into our previous topic.
Shocking.
She was of interest to the Southern Poverty Law Center because of her peculiar views. And this document we got from FBI made a reference to that it checked with the Thurston County Sheriff's Office, which was the sheriff's office where her compound is. And the sheriff's office said, we're aware of the group. They said they know about them. And so Erica and I kind of shrugged and said, well, let's ask the Thurston County Sheriff's Office, how aware are you? And so we submitted a records request to them. We are still, this has been months now, we are still getting records. We have gotten literally hundreds of pages of PDF documents, of reports, of incidents. We've gotten digital images of photographs and film. A lot of it we have posted. We have posted almost all of it on our Patreon. And we will be doing another blog post soon on the what else we've gotten since we did the last blog post update. The gist of it, Emily, is people try to access that property all the time. And there are often former students, which means people that have given them money, and do not seem to be mentally well. Some of it is pretty alarming. People will climb the walls and try to get in, or try to cut their way through fences and say that they believed that Jay-Z Knight was giving them telepathic messages that she was in distress and needed them to come save her, and things like that. That gets propagated and cultivated when you open your mind to all of this channeling. It's a complicated line to walk and to deal with, that she and her staff are cultivating belief in very questionable things, and then how to handle it when these people take these questionable things and it turns into crimes, basically. And just a lot of stuff. And you can find things that have happened on our blog. Sometimes it is former staff members that'll make death threats. We've posted some material where you can see trucks ramming the gate and trying to get in and just crazy stories that happen.
Gosh. It sounds absolutely wild. I feel
It
has
is. It
there
is.
been like a documentary about her?
I would not be surprised, but I don't
Mm.
know of it off the top of my head.
Interesting. Oh, this is my dad in the chat, saying that she later appeared in the movie What the Bleep Do We Know, which is that's a film in itself. JC Knight called her new religion Church I Am in the early Oh, okay. Well, I need to look into JC Knight. Obviously, I do not know enough, and it sounds absolutely insane.
And
Go on.
a number of the records we've obtained too will be not directly things that happened with the school, but they'll just reference the school. Like sometimes there'll be domestic disturbances or some type of other bizarre behavior that the officer responding to the incident will note. The person said that they're a Ramtha follower, like they'll just qualify it right off the bat, like there was a hit and run was one of the records I read, and they just left the scene and went to their home. And so when the deputy gets to, or the law enforcement officer gets to the scene, they're just immediately barking that, sovereign citizen and all of that crap, and leave me alone. You're not welcome on the property. And so that's how it ends up that, this Ramtha follower is screaming sovereign citizen at me. I need backup. Yeah, it's pretty wild. And they're like, there were two other people. One of them just went in the trailer. I don't know what they're doing in the trailer. I need backup. And it's like, this is just insane, man. This is
When
insane.
was all of this happening? Is this over like decades?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. That's why I envision that this very helpful person at the Thurston County Sheriff's Office probably puts aside a certain amount of time a month to work on those expanding frontiers people's requests, because about once a month she'll send us a notice that, log in and give us the couple dollars for processing and you'll get this month's release. And it's covered years. Yeah. Years.
Has anyone else
Relatively
ever?
recently, like this century, yeah, some of it's 2014, to present. Yeah, like we've had some of it that's happened since 2020. Some of the files that we posted along with the digital images, which means pictures that they gave us, was a guy that busted onto the property and wanted to meet Jay-Z Knight. And he was a big, healthy young man. And he got in a scrap with the officers that responded. And it took tasers to get him down and cuffed and into the car. And from the photos they shared, it looks like he got the best of the fight against two police officers. And it's just insane. Which, brings up all kinds of questions like you and I have been discussing tonight. If we only look at this and say, well, she's not really challenging a warrior, let's move on to another topic. Well, then we miss some of the nuance here of, I wonder why the sheriff's office is basically being her personal security force, if they are, or would they be doing that for anybody? And how much money does she donate annually? Or are we into newer generations now that are kind of fed up with it too? Like that could be a possibility too, that law enforcement in her area is kind of sick of her basically cultivating mental illness and then them needing to protect her from the people that succumb to it.
And that's and you know, we were talking about that film, What the Bleep Do We Know? And I remember that being like a really big film, and there's all kinds of people are in that, people like Joe Dispenza, if you've ever heard of Joe Dispenza. It's these kind of you know, and I don't know if I don't think he does chat. I can't remember if he does channeling. I get so confused with all of them, but like these people are, like you said, cultivating mental illness, intentional or not, doesn't really matter at that point. And it, like, you're also dealing with a lot of people who are drawn to this because they've had some sort of trauma in their life, right? And I know, like, who hasn't had trauma, you know, but everybody has in some sense. But a lot of people are drawn to this, like I said before, because they want to change like their material conditions, right? The world around them isn't the way they want it. It wasn't how anybody really wants it to be. They might have lost their job, or they have a very low paid job, and they get exploited by these people who come in and they say, I am channeling X entity, and if you just give your money to me or come to this school and you can unlock the Akashic records and we'll start going through everything and everything will be fine, you know, all this stuff. And it's like, I can see, and I don't like the people that say, like we were saying earlier, it's like people that write off people that believe in these kind of things as, oh, you know, gullible or an idiot or something. It's like, no, there are a lot of factors that will drive a person to believe in these things. And ultimately, I think that a lot of people do end up believing in these kind of things because they want their lives to be better. And these people are directly telling them, follow me, I will make your life better. Or listen to this entity that I'm channeling. It will make your life better.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, my disclaimer of sorts is I don't know what happens to people. I'm sure that there's more to be learned about than humanity currently knows. I don't know what everybody sees in the sky. I don't know, you know, there's stories about entities in their house. I don't know. I don't claim to know. So I'm not saying that it all didn't happen or that there's explanations currently known for everything. I wouldn't presume that. But we can look at a lot of circumstances where we can point out the contradictions in these people's stories, and that we can use tools like the Freedom of Information Act and authentic documents to show that they are changing their stories as convenient, and they're not accounting for why they did this or why they did that. And, you know, like I said earlier, if someone's best excuse is they're stupid, well, then why are we paying any? Like, they just don't know any better. They've got a PhD and they don't know how to conduct an experiment and then reassess the situation and conduct it again. Well, then why are we even listening to them? It's ridiculous.
Absolutely. And there's also like an element, especially I guess within like the UFO world, it is like this cultivating of belief from like directly inside elements of the government, right? There are elements of the government that are directly trying to, for whatever reason, you could debate it until the cows come home. Everybody's got a different theory. But it is, to me anyway, it is indisputable that factions inside the government intelligence agencies want people to believe in UFOs. So when you then start pushing people into this pipeline, right? I used the word pipeline, even though I decried it earlier. But you know what? When you start pushing
I'm
people,
following you.
pushing people into this belief system. But then and it's kind of going back to, I'm not even formulating questions now, I'm just having a rant, but it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about skeptics with a capital S, right? It's like they seem to discount that completely. And it's like, okay, yeah, you've got your con artists, you've got your grifters, you've got your hoaxers, but what about your people that are in positions of power who are on record trying to manipulate people into believing in UFOs? Why don't skeptics ever seem to want to grapple with that?
Who are going on widely watched news shows saying on the record, nobody's saying it's alien, and getting on social media and saying it's alien.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly an agenda there. I mean, clearly. Mm-hmm. Why? I don't know. A lot of times I'll say I really don't need to know somebody's motive. I really don't care. If I can just break down their work and look into what they've asserted, what they've written, and I can establish it's subpar work, I really don't. Like that's step one. You know, regardless of motive, you can establish that they are not establishing their point. They're not proving their point. And that in itself is relevant in that if they're a current or former intelligence analyst, if they're an educated individual and they are refusing to even acknowledge that they have not provided evidence and support to proper proportion of their belief and what they're asserting, then we're already at a problem there. And yeah, I'm directly talking about people like Christopher Mellon and Louise Elizondo that have the experience and the education to be able to empathize with a demographic that would say, well, maybe we can suspend judgment, but you haven't established that stuff to be fact. There's a big problem when they evade that and fuel the people that will accept it and embrace it as fact without it being demonstrated to be so.
Absolutely. And this isn't a new phenomenon. This goes back decades. And I want to kind of go quickly because I don't want to keep you for hours and hours and hours. But I want to kind of touch on your second book, which is your most recent book, which is Wayward Sons. First of all, I do want to ask you whether or not that title is a reference to the song by Kansas.
It is not. And of course, I was aware of it and I couldn't resist because it's about a group of people ranging from UFO believers to a man named Colonel Joseph Bryan III.
Right.
That was involved with the CIA and intelligence services. And he was a Princeton man and had a lot of connections with Princeton people like Alan Dulles at the CIA. And some of the people that Joseph Bryan was responsible for in a faction of the CIA called the Office of Policy Coordination. He were the sons of men that had gone to Princeton and been involved with, or the Ivy League and been involved with intelligence services. And as I got immersed in reading this stuff, and you know how many different things you read and you study compared to what actually ends up directly
Yeah.
referenced in your book.
Yeah.
You almost feel like you're channeling them to some extent. And if you've done it well, or you've done a lot of it, you've really gotten a feel for the culture and the times and what may have they been thinking at this point in time and how may have they been feeling. And I really felt plugged into the mid 20th century. OSS and CIA wanted the best and the brightest and the wealthiest. And those were the families they wanted people from, the ones that were cultured, the ones that knew the newspaper people, the ones that were comfortable in Europe and abroad, that weren't out of their element if they were asked to travel abroad. And I just couldn't resist, Wayward Sons, that I felt like a lot of the people in these books that I've written and in that story were trying to prove their worth to the people that came before them. And there was one man in particular, a guy a CIA operative and asset named Pinky Thompson, that his father was a decorated war hero that had a whole spread done on him in Time magazine. And Pinky inherited an ungodly, just an obscene amount of money through the oil industry for the mid 20th century, and literally went to Washington and volunteered to help in the intelligence services. And I thought, that's a guy that's just haunted by, am I good enough? What can I do? How can I help? I got all this. How can I help? Was at least my read on it,
So tell us a little bit about, you don't have to do you do not have to do, don't feel like you've got to stay forever and tell us everything, but just, a little bit about who NICAP were.
Yeah, so the reason I was going down the Joseph Bryan III rabbit hole was because this guy that ran a propaganda outfit, he was called a psychological warfare specialist, ended up on the board of directors of a UFO organization, NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. So I was like, how did that happen? And let me start by saying that if any of you guys want to read one of my books, and now's not a good time for you to make a purchase, just get a hold of me on social media or email me. You can find ways to contact me through my Twitter account or through expandingfrontiersresearch.org. Get a hold of me, and I'll get a free PDF to you if you'd like to read one of them. They're made to be read.
Highly recommended, but I also highly recommend purchasing a copy. And I've also left down in the description where you can go and buy Jack's books.
Thank you. And I'll start as well by saying I wasn't interested in UFO stories. I think that's disappointed some people about my NICAP book. Some of the old timers that didn't particularly agree, I don't think, with my lack of, I'm not impressed by what NICAP accomplished. I think it's really interesting. I can recognize their achievements of gaining like 14,000 members, they claimed at one point, largest UFO organization membership ever put together. I really envy the days that could be a marketing plan. Can you imagine the work that you could do if you could have 14,000 journal subscribers?
My God.
I know. So they had a staff that challenged Project Blue Book for payroll and whatnot, and weren't good business managers. They weren't able really to keep up with it. But I wasn't interested in their UFO work, and what my book is about is the overlapping of the characters in the NICAP story with the intelligence community. And sometimes they're one and the same. And I discovered some things that surprised me, that I'm very grateful to Barry Greenwood for sharing archived material with me that was just really important in helping me form my assessment of what happened. A summary would be, Emily, that T. Townsend Brown, who is credited with being the first NICAP director, had an existing relationship with the Department of Defense that he was courting, wanting funding for something he called Project Winter Haven, that he had some ideas in his head about ways that UFOs could be the inspiration for weapons research and development. And he started hanging around a UFO group in the Washington area. A lady named Clara John was involved.
Is that the listening post, little listening post?
That's correct. She was doing a newsletter. A man named Arnold Krugman was involved. And he was, and it just fascinated me how, like saying nothing new under the sun, how much this was like to the stars to a certain extent. Mr. Krugman was well experienced in public relations. He was a mover and shaker. He had ties to newspapers. He was a primary force on getting public opinion behind what became a dam on, I think it was the Colorado River, a major tax thing in its day and construction project. And he wanted to market along with NICAP. He had ideas about selling these pins that said that you're part of, the group, whatever, interplanetary spaceships and, visitors. And fascinatingly, his letters indicate that he had concerns about literal illegal aliens that needed to be documented and questioned about what's, because this was the days of Stranger in the Pentagon and, all this craziness.
Contactees, Venusians.
Yes. And they were just like men from Venus and stuff like that. And he wrote to Townsend Brown that Krugman wrote Brown that he thought that this could appeal to youth and young Americans and help them on the right path. And he had really polished wording for what we've been talking about, directing their political views and getting them registered to vote for the things he wanted them to vote for and things like this. So that was going on. And T. Townsend Brown had this existing relationship with the Department of Defense, and he had a relationship with a group called Council Services that was a public relations group that I was able to get documentation through archives as well as CIA documentation, a letter written by Roscoe Hillenkoetter, a former director of Central Intelligence who became a board member of NICAP, that an agency called the ECA, it was the Economic Cooperation Administration, and it became USAID, who I know Tanner is familiar with through the Nedeljkovic story and all of this stuff, was an arm of the CIA. The ECA was a asset of Roscoe Hillenkoetter's CIA. And they had Council Services under contract to do work for them. And one of the things that Council Services was doing in 1949, 1950 was traveling abroad. They were going to China, and allegedly under the premise of economic revitalization and help like that. The people that ran Council Services, that co-founded it, was a man named Leo McCormick and a woman named Mary Von King. These names aren't really as important as these two were directly involved with intelligence agencies as well. And when I say that, I don't mean a distant cousin or happened to be at a dinner one night that some officer was at. I mean, wrote letters to people overseas that were CIA officers, represented CIA officers with their PR firm and things like this. And when T. Townsend Brown decided to incorporate NICAP, Council Services incorporated it, and Mary Von King and T. Townsend Brown were two of the incorporators, with the third being a man that had worked with the State Department, a career State Department man that had worked abroad. And I obtained a copy of an original contract drawn up between Council Services and NICAP that said that Council Services officers had the authority to bring in more personnel at their discretion. And I just found this like almost funny, and it's transparent implication that for those not aware, the State Department is basically especially mid-20th century, is basically a spy organization like the CIA. The office that I mentioned, Office of Policy Coordination, that Joseph Bryan, who ended up a NICAP director, operated his psychological warfare team out of, was jointly run by the CIA and State Department. And so it just fascinated me that the State Department had a man that incorporated NICAP with the clause that they could assign personnel. And right on this man, right on his name was O'Keefe. I think it was Thomas O'Keefe. Right on his CV that he gave NICAP, he had no reason to hide. That he said he had sat on a committee that assessed State Department employees for work overseas.
Right.
And so that means he designated spies for assignment. And I just thought how fascinating that is, and how times change. That, see, that was something to be proud of, and that was patriotic, and that was good work. And this is who Townsend Brown wanted to rub elbows with and get funding. And, you know, like, the more I can hang around these people, the better. And he was short-lived then as director, which goes into a whole nother bunch of problems. They went through 3 treasurers within 3 months. One died soon after that by asphyxiation in a car in a garage, similar to how Jessup died.
Very. I don't think I knew about that.
Yeah. He was made treasurer. He quickly resigned, and I found all of that interesting. That treasurers no sooner would take the job than they'd say, give it to somebody else. So something was going on with that. And one of the main people I took an interest in, Emily, in this original organizing group, and to summarize, the big thing I'm getting at here, and that I felt the premise of my book became, is one of the going stories in UFO circles is that the CIA undermined NICAP and brought them down in order to keep them from the truth. And my research suggests that the CIA actually started NICAP, and it was a CIA asset. How much Kehoe knew that, I don't know, but I think it's pretty safe to say that they didn't find him to be a threat to whatever they were doing, or he wouldn't have continued doing it as long as he did. But that's a whole nother issue. Who I wanted to tell you about was one of the men that I think O'Keefe and Mary Von King brought in, was a man named Nicholas de Roquefort. And he was a Russian-born Frenchman whose father was in the service and was in Russia at the time. And he became an immigrant, came to America, working with American forces, and he did speeches about democracy. He was considered very talented at psychological warfare and undermining fascism and being pro-democracy. He was almost certainly a CIA asset. There have been lawsuits to get his records from the CIA, and the courts have upheld the CIA's argument that if the records exist, that they're exempt from disclosure. That I don't think this has been argued in court since the 70s, so someone might want to roll the dice again now. But in the 70s, the judge ruled that public accountability is important for an intelligence agency, but so is secrecy if they're able to do their job. And one of the things that fascinated me about de Roquefort's involvement with NICAP was that what he was known for in intelligence circles and Washington was he had been credited with being the brains behind the most influential and most wealthy organization in what at that time was called the China Lobby. And that was to try to keep Red China out of the United Nations. And it was almost certainly a CIA asset, and he was almost certainly working with plans that were given to him by a team of intelligent, talented people, is why he seemed so intelligent. And he called that, I think he called it the Committee of 5 Million or something like that. Yeah. And it, like I say, it was almost certainly a CIA asset, because a man that went on to be a top asset in the CIA had run a group called the Committee of 1 Million a few years prior to that. So there's just all this stuff around de Roquefort. And it appeared that he was being told to go to NICAP and let's do it again, that we've got the blueprint for how to do this. I've done a lot of FOIA requests on de Roquefort. Some have been more successful than others. I've shared in my book what I received on him. I am still awaiting 200 pages approximately from the FBI that had been scheduled. I've been waiting for it for years. And at the time I first submitted it and they gave me a response on it, the projected release date was last December. So it should be coming along pretty soon. So there's a long-winded some stuff about it, but I just found it a really fascinating story, and it is chock full of CIA and State Department personnel. And it being interested in the things I'm a bit flabbergasted that people can still look at this organization and even find anything interesting about stories about flying saucers in it. I think it's completely about the players.
Absolutely. I just want to say thank you to Spooky Phil, and also thank you to Erica for your very generous super chats. But yeah, you're completely right, and it's such a to me, this is so much more interesting than some theory that you've got no evidence for. Here is an utterly fascinating historical story that is very oh my god, it's so many super chats. Thank you, Steve. Oh my god, you guys are being so generous. Good lord. But there's just it's to listen to you lay it out, I'm just gee, these layers of all these different people and just the intersection of everything. It genuinely blows my mind, and it also makes me laugh every time people say stupid things like keep politics out of UFOs. It's literally always been politics.
That's let me give you one more while we're at it that I did just think was so fascinating. One of the CIA officers that was represented by counsel services, that was who incorporated NICAP with Townsend Brown, was a man named Colonel Pete, was his nickname, Amos. And he was Greek and did some interesting things, like he invented Grecian formula, if anybody's ever heard of that. And it's a hair thing for men. And I kind of joked that I guess, having access to the CIA lab had its benefits, But yeah, he was a CIA asset, well decorated, outspoken, flamboyant. And at one point gave an Air Force officer a heads up about a UFO report. in the Washington area. And this Air Force officer, I got the file on it and I was reading the report, and I'm just reading between the lines that this Air Force officer has to be wondering, and what did I do to bestow this good fortune on me that a CIA officer felt like he needs to flip this to the Air Force, you know? And yeah, I'm kind of being sarcastic here. And it was a hoax. The case turned out to be a hoax. It's interesting to read the Air Force officer's account, if for no other reason, you get the anatomy of a hoax, how he came to how he interviewed this person, interviewed that person, went back to person one, and how it fell apart. And a really interesting thing about Colonel Amos's account of the story was that he gave the Air Force officer the names of people that did not exist, that the Air Force officer could never locate. And when that Air Force officer went to the individual that Amos said told him the story, that individual denied ever telling him the names of the people that Amos gave him. So that's pretty curious too. Where did Amos get these names? Why did he ever care? You know, why? You worried we're being invaded by Martians? Why? We don't know. And then it came to mind because you saying how layered that is. Couple all that in with he was a business partner with council services personnel that helped Townsend Brown incorporate NICAP. And we don't know why this CIA officer was sending bogus UFO reports up the whole pipeline. We don't know. But right, I'll tell you what did come to mind, and then I'd love to hear what you have to say. James Carrion in his work wrote about that he felt like some of the circumstances around Roswell were for code breaking purposes. And that if you put proper nouns in a report, and then if you're able to intercept the coded messages and you know those proper nouns would be in it, then that would give you a good idea of, like, if you can find those proper nouns, then you're on your way to breaking the rest of the code. Or at a bare minimum, if Amos knows this story starts right here with me with these names I made up, if I find those names somewhere else, I'll know they got it from this Air Force. That came to mind as well. So yeah. Now, please, what were you gonna say?
Well, we mentioned this a little bit before we started the stream, but the thing that always kind of sticks out to me, I guess because it's just been a topic of my research for way too long now. It took nearly 2 years. I can't believe it. I got into really researching the Montauk Project and its origins. And its origins are in the Philadelphia experiment. And the Philadelphia experiment is directly the man that received that story was Morris K. Jessup. And Morris K. Jessup was part of NICAP, along with T. Townsend Brown. And he was like there at the very beginning. And things that people don't actually talk about Morris K. Jessup, when I did some research, I'm going to end up ruining the details of this. I know, because I'm trying to do it off the top of my head, and it was so long ago that I last looked at it. He was involved in a lot of like archaeological digs, and he was also a photographer. He went out and like kind of took photographs. anyway, the people that he was going out on these archaeological expeditions with were confirmed spies back in like the 1920s. One of the
Fascinating.
guys, yeah, and nobody ever seems to talk about it. There's his whole history is like very not a lot of people seem to have like properly dug into his history. He was also involved in what's his name? He was involved in like Fordlandia, but not like being in Fordlandia, but he was involved in like going out and looking at rubber plantations. Then because he was an astronomer, he was out in an observatory in South Africa. The man was like so well traveled. There's a news article where he kind of like goes on this like massive, like he goes to like almost every country in like South America, and he's like going all over the place. But it was interesting to me because at some point he moves to Washington DC, and I'm still kind of like in a research kind of phase with this Maurice K. Jessup stuff. I've got like 2 episodes. I recorded it in like a podcast form, just some of the rough research, because at some point I was planning on doing like a Philadelphia experiment episode, like a full video. But I wanted to get all of my kind of like ducks in a row first. So I started doing this really rough research on Maurice K. Jessup, and I did 2 episodes of it in a podcast format, and it's on my Patreon. It is kind of behind a paywall, but again, like will tell anyone about what I uncovered, and I will, if you want to listen to it and you don't have £5 a month, then DM me. But his early history, I think I tracked it. I think I got up until like the 1940s, and then you kind of lose him for a little bit, but then he shows up in Washington DC, and it just interested me because I always thought that his first connection with like intelligence would have been when he's in Washington DC, but it's not. It starts way earlier with these people in the 1920s that were confirmed spies, and I can't remember the name of the guy that he was with, and it's going to bug me, and I'm going to try and find it, because otherwise I will feel not good about not saying it, so I get pedantic.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and so is Jessup. Yeah,
Yeah,
I was really
Sylvanus
interested in him.
Morley. Sylvanus
Pardon?
Morley. They were Sylvanus Morley and Samuel Lothrop. They were operatives
Hmm.
for Office of Naval Intelligence, right? Now, here's where it gets even more bizarre. We then skip forward to the Philadelphia experiment, and Maurice K. Jessup obviously is involved with NICAP, as we have found out, discovered, not just for our conversation, but Jack's research, Jack's book, NICAP, we can safely say, are a CIA asset, right? We've got an intelligence connection there. Then Carl Allen comes along, and he comes up with this. I'm really assuming that people know what the Philadelphia experiment is, and I'm not going to go into a massive amount of detail. You can, if you just Google it, that will give you a very small idea of what it is. But you have a man called Carl Allen who kind of comes up with this hoax story, right? And I don't necessarily believe that he was an agent, or that he was working. I think that it is quite possible that he was a man with some mental issues, because I've been to the Grey Barker archive and I've seen this man's writing, like scrawls, like we're talking like reams and reams of handwritten, incredibly hard to follow rantings and ramblings. However, he comes up with this story about naval ship USS Eldridge that gets teleported from one location to another location, and he in Maurice K. Jessup's book, because Maurice K. Jessup was an author as well. He wrote several books. He had one book called The Case for the UFO. Carl Allen starts annotating this copy of the case for the UFO. He writes in like 3 different voices, right? He's like 3 different people, and he writes all in the margins and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, he sends it off. I think he even sent one copy to Jessup. I think he sent another copy to Office of Naval Research. They were taken with it. They got a stenographer. I don't know if it was a stenographer. They got someone anyway. They basically employed the Varro Manufacturing Company to reprint this entire manuscript with all of these annotations in it. It's called the Varro edition for the case for the UFO, and they started pushing this story, right? Like really, like, you know, like interrogating Morris K. Jessup about it. It's like, I'm still very like early days on the research, but there seems to be like there's a lot of people involved in this story that have intelligence connections. That's all I'm going to say. And you know, the Office of Naval Research then pushing this story. And again, like, and I think Tanner brought up in the chat when we started talking about NICAP and T. Townsend Brown, that T. Townsend Brown now has come back into UFO conversation. Like I was saying earlier, there's a documentary that's out all about kind of T. Townsend Brown and how he you know, UFO propulsion and blah 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 blah, and so it's just interesting to me, I guess. I don't know where I'm going with it. That's my problem.
Oh,
like
yeah,
you get
absolutely.
to a point where you can't prove anything. That's the problem.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It really is that the Navy published the annotations and like you say, brought it to Morris Jessup's attention and like gave him a book, and that's a real head scratcher to me.
Yeah, it really is. And he just to address this, some of it is unclear. I think I went over this, and again, like I've got like a lot of research, so I'm happy to share it if you're interested. And I can send you kind of what I came up with. But his family were like, Jessup's family were like fairly, I feel like when I was researching them, I kind of came across like a lot of like early family history, that he was like, his family were relatively well off. Like they were farmers, but I think like even one of his relatives' house is like it's quite a like a landmark and stuff. So yeah, he definitely, you know, he seemed to be kind of like a very bright man. And again, I get into this in the research that I did, which I will reiterate, I'm happy to share with anyone. I don't have like I guess the thing with that is like, I shouldn't talk about things unless I've prepared my hypothesis and my opinions if I've fully fleshed out. Otherwise, I'm like rambling.
I think it's fine to spitball. It like we were saying, it's identified as that. Please go ahead.
And it just made me wonder, I guess, like, you know, because we know that a lot of UFO researchers have been targeted with disinformation, whether that could be an early case of disinformation. Because again, like, it doesn't have to be like disinformation from the start, right? Carl Allen can still be a hoaxer. He doesn't have to be an operative. He could just have come up with this whole thing, and then people that are like, oh, you know what, we could use this to cover up X, Y, and Z thing. We could use this to get this guy to believe in this for whatever reason. That's just kind of where my brain ends up going with it sometimes, I think.
It's really hard to speculate because intelligence professionals are really good at what they do, and it's virtually impossible to identify their agenda if it's intended to be concealed. And that's because there's a lot of chain of command, and people just take their orders and do what they're told to do. And the guy that took the pictures to the New York Post and said, I need you to publish these, may very well not know why, may not care, just wants to drop them off at the Post and go get a Reuben sandwich or whatever. A story I like to fall back on for an example of that is, are you familiar with the Argo story, the movie Argo?
Don't think so.
Off
the top of my head at 2:30 in the morning.
Yeah,
I'm not
it's basically the long and short of it is a brilliant CIA officer named Tony Antonio, I think Tony Mendez, put together a plan to exfiltrate Americans out of Iran during the hostage crisis in the 70s. That were hiding in around the city, that weren't in the embassy, but were hiding, that had not been in the embassy when it was put under siege and were hiding. And the Canadian government was helping act as a liaison, and Officer Mendez put together this brilliant plan to use a movie script and set up a fake movie studio in Hollywood. And the movie was about a war with extraterrestrials among aliens. And for this war, they wanted to use Iran as the landscape. They said that would fit the script. So they flew into Iran as movie producers, Canadians, and successfully exfiltrated the Americans. And when they flew out, the authorities weren't any the wiser. And I bring this up because I often think about, if it had somehow leaked and gotten out that the CIA had set up a bogus Hollywood studio and bought a UFO movie script or alien related sci-fi movie script, if we had 1,000 guesses, it wouldn't have been to exfiltrate hostages out of Iran. I mean, they're really good. And when they identify something they're working on and they've got a mark in their sights, like the Iranian government, they're really, really good at them not having a clue what just happened.
Absolutely. Jack, I feel like we've been on a whirlwind tour of like a million different topics. And I'm gonna wrap it up because we're closing in on the 3-hour mark, but I feel like we could go for another 3.
I'll get another coffee. We're just getting started.
I know it's the daytime for you. It's bloody 20 to 3 in the morning for me, even though I am up all hours of the night. I guess to wrap it up, I feel like this is a good question to end with. Considering all of the craziness and the intensity of the topics that you research on a daily basis, what do you do to decompress?
Great question. I'm a sports fan. I was watching basketball today, watching the Orlando Magic and Cleveland Cavaliers before we did your show. I enjoy baseball, football as a spectator. I'm a musician. I play guitar and various other instruments, but mostly guitar. I listen to a lot of music. I like to drive and turn the music up loud in the car. That's a good question.
I can tell you're a big music guy because you're always sharing good music on Twitter. And there's
How
always
do
been
you
like, oh God, I don't think I do. That's part of the problem. Christ, what do I do to decompress? But funnily enough, I've just gotten into baseball actually. I've never been a sports fan before, but somehow that happened. So I've been watching a lot of baseball weirdly. What else? Do you know what? I think the most important thing in this is like having people that have got like having like this be like part of your life, but also having people that are like not part of this at all, that you can just go and like just like my like in real life friends are not like really into UFOs or 40 topics or anything like that, and I kind of, when I'm with them, it's kind of like, okay, I'm out of that zone, for
Yeah.
for a little while, which is nice. I've got one last question actually. What piece of advice would you give to someone who's entering this field for the first time?
It's
Hard one.
really important to verify information. People say all kinds of things. They have all kinds of reasons for saying it. And you just have to verify everything. We've talked a lot about intelligence officers and intelligence assets tonight. You can't believe anything they say either. You can't accept it just because you want to or because it fits what you want to believe. And that goes for skepticism as well. If intelligence officers are shooting down a certain story or shooting down a theory, you just can't believe it without proper verification. Belief and trust should not be in the equation. That would be how I think I would sum it up. And thanks for letting me talk my way around to that. Trust should not factor in the equation of research and what ends up in our videos and in our articles. It's not about trusting people. It's about verifying information. And we can quote them and say, here's what they say. But as far as promoting it as true or not, trust just can't factor.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I think that is a great way to sum it up. Isn't that the old X-Files thing? Trust no one.
Yeah. Like, I'm always harping about standards of evidence. And I mean, that's really what it's all about is it starts and ends with standards of evidence. We can agree on what evidence indicates if we can't agree on what makes it good and quality evidence.
Absolutely. Jack, thank you so much for joining me. You've been an absolute treasure, an absolute fountain of knowledge. And I'm going to leave all of the descriptions to find Jack, to find Expanding Frontiers, and to find Jack's books, all in the description. Please go check it out. If you're financially able to buy a book from Amazon, please do so to support the research. If you're also financially able, you can support Expanding Frontiers on Patreon. They also take donations via their website. And yeah, Jack, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Emily.
You're welcome. I will talk to you soon. Well, that's it, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight and being so active in the chat. Thank you to everyone who left super chats. You guys are amazing. And I also, actually, before we go, I just wanted to do a quick shout out to, hang on one bloody second while I sort this out. Hang on. God, I'm terrible at this. Share screen. Okay. If you're looking for good UFO and Fortean related t-shirts, may I present to you BWP's Threadless store. You can also find him on Twitter, I think at BPleasies. But can you just look at this for a second? Like, my God, look at these t-shirts. We've got UFO cover up live. I also want to just say there is a sale on until the 25th of April. So you can go and support the store. I mean, these are just amazing. I don't know why it's been so slow, but look at that t-shirt. Look how good that is. We've got some Society for the Investigation of the like, look at, come on. If you're not supporting this t-shirt store, I genuinely don't know what you're doing. Like, come on, look at this. This is just great. I'm such a fan. And yeah, and also Bradley, who is the owner of this store, will be coming on the stream at some point to talk to us all about Bigfoot, and that will be coming up very soon, which is very, very exciting. So thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. See you next week.